Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for coming. I have the unenviable role of speaking after lunch, so hopefully all of you are well caffeinated. So as part of my role at Muslim Advocates, I work directly with Islamic centers and nonprofits all across the country. And the number one thing we have been hearing from parents, and as a parent myself, I fully understand, is a concern about anti-Muslim bullying. So today I'm just going to give a very short overview to help contextualize the bullying of Muslim students, as well as give a brief background on the American Muslim population. So just to start, the studies are widely varied in terms of the number of American Muslims in this country. We have seen studies that show that American Muslims are 3 million in America. We have seen some that show us as high as 6 million, which leaves us at between 1 and 2% of the American population. And in one study, we have seen that the American Muslim population is expected to double by the year 2050. And what that means is that in some cities, you'll have a much higher concentration of American Muslims, while in other parts of the country, you'll have very few Muslims in your classroom. And also, as here, I've put a short bar graph here to show the diversity of the Muslim community. And what this really highlights is that the Muslim, I know it's hard to read, it's the second one there, but it shows that there's no majority demographic when it comes to the American Muslim population. 38% identify as white, 28% identify as black, 28% identify as an immigrant community, and then there's a small percentage of Latinos and whatnot. So what that means is in your classroom, you might find somebody like me with the name of Brenda that you might not know is an American Muslim in your classroom, and you might find others that are from an immigrant population or who are African American Muslims. But the point being is that American Muslims have been in this country for a very long time. And when we talk about anti-Muslim bullying, we want to make sure that we contextualize that it does not happen in a vacuum. We, at this point in time, in the year 2016, American Muslims continue to make the news cycle in a very unfavorable way. And if we look back at studies from 2012, 40% of the American population viewed Muslims favorably. In 2014, we saw a steep decline down to 27%. And as you can imagine, we expect that that number would be much lower today in 2016. And so what I've put here is just a word cloud of some of the words that some of your students in your classrooms are continually bombarded with. Everything from bans of Muslims to Muslims being like uncorked animals. These are the types of rhetoric and the type of climate that we live in today and that American Muslims are continually surrounded by. And as part of our work at Muslim Advocates, we do a lot of work on tracking hate crimes against the American Muslim population. And since November 2015, we have identified over 100 hate crimes that have happened across the country. Now, as much as that is a sharp increase in hate crimes against the community, we've also noticed that almost 50% of those have happened against houses of worship. And that is unique. In the past, hate crimes tended to happen between individuals, and now we're seeing houses of worship being attacked. And why is this relevant? For students, it's important to understand that the mosque and the Islamic Center serves as a community center, a safe space for the American Muslim population. And this is where they go on weekends, this is where they go to celebrate holidays, this is where they go for evening prayer services. This is really their home away from home. And when we see the Islamic centers have everything from being firebombed to graffiti to bullet holes, this significantly impacts young American Muslim students. Oh, there we go. And when we talk about how this impacts American Muslim students when it comes to bullying, unfortunately, we do not have any national-based data to reflect the impact of anti-Muslim bullying. But we do have some smaller surveys that have happened, and I've highlighted 3 of them, one in Virginia, one in Maryland, and one in California. And what this shows is that in Virginia, 80% of Muslim youth felt that they were the targets of anti-Muslim bullying. In Maryland, 1/3 of Muslim students bullied said they had experienced insults or abuse because of their faith. And in California, just in 2014, we found some of the studies reflect that 52% experienced verbal insults, and 20% of those felt that that came directly from a staff member at the school. And I know we've talked a lot about peer-to-peer bullying throughout the day today, but we also find that a lot of the rhetoric and a lot of the bullying can happen from administrators at the school. And in some examples that we have heard of teachers passing out materials to their students called Everything You Need to Know About Islam. And included in there, it says 38% of Muslims feel that if you leave the faith, you should be executed, as well as giving instructions to students for what to do if you're taken hostage by a radical Islamist. And these are the types of materials that we have seen being passed out by teachers. And unfortunately, in another report that we had from Florida, we had a 14-year-old student whose teacher kept joking and calling him raghead Taliban. And that student now feels uncomfortable going to school, and as you can imagine, this is coming from someone in that trusting relationship as a teacher. So moving forward, when we talk about strategies for positive engagement, really the strongest evidence shows that when you increase cultural competency through training of teachers and administrators, that fosters a multicultural environment, and an environment within the classroom of inclusivity is really our best bet in terms of combating anti-Muslim bias in the classroom. And also, when we talk about facilitating dialogue in the classroom, there was an initiative kicked off by the White House in December called Know Your Neighbor, talking about how a lot of folks do not communicate with others outside of their faith, and folks tend to only communicate with folks that are within their faith. And so trying to reach out, studies have shown that knowing someone from another religious group increases your positive views of that group, and that can also help significantly decline bullying in that context. And another area, which I know we've talked about a few times today, is a really helpful fact sheet and Dear Colleague letters that were put out by the Department of Education. And Muslim advocates, just this week, we have sent out a letter to every single state superintendent in the country, reminding them of the concern of anti-Muslim bullying, and also attaching the fact sheet and Dear Colleague letter as reference, as they do give very detailed positive ways that the schools can help combat this. And as part of that, we've also asked all of our community members to share with their local school districts to engage in that conversation on a local level as well. And lastly, intervention and reporting incidents of bullying. As you'll hear more from Dr. Abbasi, as well as from some students later today, this is still a significant area where a lot of students do not feel comfortable approaching administration. They don't see what the point is. They don't see any sort of positive outcome, and a lot of them internalize the bullying that happens to them. So efforts to increase intervention, early intervention, as well as reporting and encouraging reporting of bullying through anonymity would be incredibly helpful. Thank you all.
So, Assalamu alaikum, peace be with you all. Thank you, Brenda, for setting up the stage for me. And how do I go with this is forward. Okay. So I'm glad Brenda has set up the stage and I can just go more. I do want to focus more on the mental health impact of bullying or toxic stress or trauma. So, okay, oops. Okay. So, I'm not going to go in this. We already know what bullying is and what forms it can be happening. I do want to talk about that kids who are bullied can experience negative physical, academic, relationship, and mental health issues. I need you to absorb that. The mental health impact, and this is from stopbullying.gov, but from my experience also, they can get very depressed, anxious, have increased feeling of sadness, loneliness, changes in sleep, eating patterns, loss of interest they used to enjoy, and these issues may persist into adulthood. So isolation, disconnection, those are very important aspects to understand. Academic impact, because I work within an academic setting, I think we need to emphasize it enough because unfortunately in academic settings, students become a GPA, a number, and people are not really comprehending the impact of stress on cognitive abilities and academic impairment. Sense of isolation, discrimination, and alienation can impact self-esteem, long-term relationships and careers. Your identity can get deeply impacted and affected. This is from a mental health provider aspect. I think this is very concerning for me, that what we see is repetitive insults and humiliation can lead to increase in suicidal and homicidal ideations, thoughts, plans, intent, and some of, unfortunately, act on it too. We know 1 in 4 Muslim students are reporting experiencing stress at school. So this is a model I created. What does it mean? Oops, too small to read, I guess. Basically what I'm talking about, for a Muslim youth, negative perception, religious discrimination, all these play an impact on creating this toxic stress. But I do want to talk about the defense mechanism. These are very important to understand. So mostly we see is, we did a study on the resilience on the Muslim students at Michigan State University. These were the students who were in 2nd grade when 9/11 happened. So we took like the admission to the university as an indication of their resilience. And what we found, that kids who were very comfortable with their identity and were very comfortable talking about it and felt accepted. So awareness and acceptance were the 2 keys. So most of us have become very defensive. We constantly want to defend and talk about it, but that puts so much pressure on you, that one day a news thing, some headline happened, and you don't go to your work and talk about it. People are looking at you, why didn't you get up and talk about it? So that puts a lot of stress on the youth constantly to be on the defensive. There are youth we are seeing are just dissociated. They don't want to be associated with anything Muslim anymore or anything political. That's the apathy that's setting it. Disconnect. I'm not going to participate either with Islamic centers or school activities or anything that is either going to identify as me as Muslim. But I really want to talk about dissonance. So let's think about what dissonance is. Tension, clash resulting from the combination of 2 disharmonious or unsuitable elements. This is the internal conflict. We are navigating, these religious communities are navigating bicultural identities. These immigrant or African American kids, they are navigating bicultural identities. So what happened if the host culture and your culture that you were born in, they become unharmonious to each other? You are creating an internal conflict in these kids. Their identities are impacted. And then what happened? When they get to the point of distress, they will either end up hurting themselves or hurting others. This is an extremely important point. This is, and I do want to say one thing. What I see in these settings is when something is happening, we all start talking about it. So the narrative is taken over by one community or one who's directly being affected. But I want to say this thing. It doesn't matter if I'm here speaking here as a Muslim or a Sikh or from LGBT community, the narrative stays the same. It's the narrative of pain. So even if an LGBT kid is talking, or a Sikh person is talking, or a Muslim is talking, we are all talking the same issue. We are all using the same language, and it's of pain, suffering, and stress. So this was very disturbing for me. I couldn't sleep after reading this. This is a 6th grader, Jilani. She says, for us Muslims, this act of violence was a heavy burden to carry, knowing that people now saw me and the rest of the Muslims as targets for anger, targets for revenge, targets for retaliation. I knew that people gave me dirty looks and yelled hateful things, and sometimes even killed people who wore clothes that represented the Muslim religion or appeared to be from Middle East. This is a sixth grader. Can you imagine what kind? It's like carrying a bag of bricks on your shoulder all the time. And I insist these are no more microaggressions. We are going in very overt display of hate. These are some of the things that my kids have experienced. I have experienced. Recently, a patient got concerned that if I represent ISIS, how can I be providing good care to him? Things like, why were you hiding Osama? So this is pathophysiology of trauma. This is what happens, and I didn't realize I put such small... I need to change that. So pathophysiology of trauma is when there is toxic stress, but there's also when there is barriers within the system, barriers to your integration. We need to talk about that there might be a willingness to integrate, but the system is not set up to integrate you. We need to understand those challenges as well. I'm talking about solutions. I'm talking about applying the ecological model. This talks about bringing school, family, and community together. And of course, it has to be awareness, education, engagement, and letting this narrative be heard and giving them a chance to to the youth, to the community to talk about it. This is very important. I read it somewhere that we preserve what we love, and we love what we know, and we know what we have learned. So remember, if love is a learned experience, so is hate, bias, and stigma, and it needs to be unlearned. So what happens is, and this is from an Native American movie, Bad Sugar. I highly recommend everybody watches that. Nothing about us without us. So when you talk about anyone, let them do the talking and just listen. What happens is when we do cultural competency, or we plan these policies, or we implement practices, we are not taking in consideration the person it's going to impact, right? Thank you. So as a therapist and psychiatrist, one thing we learn is meet the person where they are. And for that, you have to be a very good listener. When we talk about a cultural identity, religion plays a very important part. And if we are talking about policies at this level, while your religious data collection is at this point, even CDC or all the other organizations, even now presenting today, we have very, very small data. There's no national data on religion. While religion does not just mean a set of practices and belief system, it can be your resiliency. It can be a very important tool of your spirituality, but it is a very important part of your identity. Let's use the R word. Tools of therapy, of course, active listening, trauma management. We have already talked about some of this. But what is our biggest need is to feel secure. And when do we feel secure? When we are heard, we feel safe, we feel trusted, we feel accepted, and feel respected. This is something I came up with. So it's interesting, cultural competency, we are always talking about tolerance, right? Majority extending tolerance to a minority. Let's put it in a personal connection. Are you guys going to just tolerate me? For how long? The end of this conference, or just, yeah? I'm here, right? Let's accept each other. Acceptance is without judgment, very open. And when you accept someone, you're opening your heart, your mind, your soul to meet them where they are. I'm going to talk briefly about how can we apply. So there are initiatives that need to be taken on a personal level, interpersonal relationship. One thing I want to focus on the school, which is a very important point being missed here, and Sam from the native tribe talked about it, is the curriculum reflecting what we are, who we are? Is the curriculum giving you real, clear historical data? If you are being taught something in your classrooms which is not the true fact, which is distorted fact, then you are already setting it up for more problems. Teachers, are the teachers being trained? Like what Hannah said, diversity days, community conversations, all those are very important aspects of it. But when I say community conversations, I do want to emphasize, bring the faith leaders in this conversation. Bring them in this conversation. It's very important that we become comfortable with the faith leaders playing an important stakeholder role. And very important to engage your legislative. We need to have them come to us and go to them. We should be comfortable with that. With that, my one thing, we keep talking about human behavior. We need to continue the dialogue around mental health, mental illnesses. There cannot be any health without mental health. Thank you.